Welcome to the Pardes channel. Today, we explain Genesis chapter 41 in a clear and simple way, step by step. I am so excited to dive into this particular chapter with you today because honestly, it contains one of the most dramatic turnarounds in the entire biblical narrative. Seriously, it's like a movie script. We're looking at a story of baffling dreams, of sudden, almost unbelievable elevation to power, and of incredibly careful strategic planning. So let's just get right into the text and see exactly how these events unfold, verse by verse.
Okay, here's a quick look at the roadmap for our explainer today. We are going to start with a welcome to Genesis 41, then we'll look at Pharaoh's baffling dreams, followed by Joseph's clear interpretation. From there, we'll cover Joseph's incredible rise to power, the dark onset of the Great Famine, and finally wrap up with some key life lessons and a quick recap. All right, let's jump right in.
Welcome to Genesis 41. Setting the stage.
Before we look at the very first verse, we really need to establish our timeline and figure out exactly where we are in the story. Genesis chapter 41 begins with a highly specific time marker. The text starts by saying, when 2 full years had passed. Now let's just pause right there. Think about what this actually means for our main character, Joseph. 2 full years. For hundreds of days, Joseph has been sitting in an Egyptian dungeon. If you remember the events leading up to this, Joseph had correctly interpreted a dream for Pharaoh's chief cupbearer while they were both locked up. And Joseph's only request? Just a simple, hey, please remember me and get me out of this prison. But the cupbearer completely forgot him, just moved on with his life. So for 2 entire years, Joseph just remained stuck there in the dark, completely abandoned and seemingly forgotten by the outside world. But then, out of nowhere, the absolute ruler of Egypt, Pharaoh himself, has a dream. Let's shift our focus over to the royal palace to see exactly what happens next.
Section 2. Pharaoh's Baffling Dreams. Visions by the Nile.
So, looking closely at verses 1 through 7, the absolute ruler of the superpower that is Egypt has his sleep violently disturbed by these vivid, really troubling visions. The text tells us Pharaoh is standing by the Nile River. Now, understanding the significance of the Nile is absolutely crucial here. It is literally the lifeblood of ancient Egypt's agriculture and their entire economy. I mean, without the Nile, Egypt simply doesn't survive, period. So, in his first dream, Pharaoh sees 7 cows, sleek and fat, come up right out of the river and begin grazing. But then, right after them, 7 other cows come up out of the Nile. But these cows, they are described as ugly and gaunt, just bone thin. And then, the impossible happens. The lean, ugly cows actually eat up the 7 fat cows. Crazy, right? Well, Pharaoh wakes up, probably startled, but then he manages to fall back asleep and boom, he has a second dream. This time, he sees 7 heads of grain, full and good, growing on a single stalk. But right after them, 7 other heads sprout up, and these are withered, incredibly thin, and scorched by the harsh east wind. And just like the cows, the thin, scorched heads of grain completely swallow up the 7 good, full heads. Pharaoh wakes up again, and this time, he fully realizes it was a dream. But it's the kind of dream that just absolutely demands an answer. It feels way too real.
Moving into verse 8, morning finally comes, and Pharaoh's mind is just deeply troubled. The text says he sent for all the magicians and all the wise men of Egypt. He gathers the absolute best and brightest, and he tells them his dreams. But we hit a wall of incredible tension right here. The text bluntly says none of them could explain the dreams to Pharaoh, not a single one. Think about the massive gravity of this for a second. Egypt was the superpower of the ancient world. It was overflowing with highly educated scholars, priests, and professional dream interpreters. I mean, their entire culture was literally built on deciphering signs from the gods. Yet all this established elite wisdom of the empire completely fails. The most powerful man in the world has a terrifying problem, and his entire royal court is just left scratching their heads, completely baffled.
And this brings us to verses 9 through 13. It's in this exact moment of sheer national desperation, with the whole court failing, that the chief cupbearer finally speaks up. The light bulb finally goes off. He turns to Pharaoh and says, "Today I am reminded of my shortcomings." Or basically, "Oh man, I really messed up." The cupbearer then recounts the events from exactly 2 years ago. He tells Pharaoh all about how he and the chief baker were thrown in prison, how they both had highly specific dreams, and how a young Hebrew servant, a servant who belonged to the captain of the guard, interpreted those dreams for them. And crucially, the cupbearer really emphasizes this to Pharaoh in verse 13. He says things turned out exactly as he interpreted them to us. The cupbearer was restored to his position exactly as the young Hebrew had predicted. This sudden revelation just completely changes the entire trajectory of the story.
Section 3. Joseph's clear interpretation. God provides the answer.
With this brand new piece of information, the scene shifts incredibly fast in verses 14 and 15. Pharaoh doesn't waste a second. He immediately sends for Joseph. The text really emphasizes the speed and urgency of this moment. They rush Joseph right out of the dungeon. But notice the fascinating cultural details we get in verse 14. Before he even steps foot before the king, Joseph shaves himself and completely changes his clothes. You see, the Egyptians highly valued being clean-shaven, completely unlike the Hebrews. So Joseph is being meticulously prepared to enter the royal court properly. Finally, Pharaoh looks at this young, former prisoner and asks for an interpretation, basically saying, "I've heard you have this amazing ability." Now notice Joseph's absolutely profound response here in verse 16. He looks at the most powerful man on earth and says, "I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." Wow. Joseph shows absolute unwavering humility. He strictly insists that only God, not himself, possesses the power to provide this interpretation. He takes absolutely zero credit for the gift.
Pharaoh then recounts his dreams in vivid detail from verse 17 all the way to 24, repeating the exact imagery of the fat and skinny cows and the full and thin heads of grain. And then, starting in verse 25 and going through 31, Joseph provides the clear, undeniable interpretation, no hesitation. The central key to unlocking this entire mystery is simply the number 7. Joseph explains that Pharaoh's 2 dreams are, in fact, just one single message. God is revealing what he's about to do. The 7 good cows and the 7 good heads of grain, they represent 7 upcoming years of great, unprecedented abundance that's going to sweep throughout the entire land of Egypt. However, the 7 lean, ugly cows and the 7 worthless heads of grain represent 7 years of severe, ravaging famine that will immediately follow those good years. In fact, Joseph warns Pharaoh in verse 31 that this coming famine is going to be so unbelievably severe that all the previous years of abundance won't even be remembered.
And this brilliant explanation leads right into the point made in verse 32. Joseph clarifies exactly why the dream repeated itself to Pharaoh in 2 different forms. He says, the reason the dream was given to Pharaoh in 2 forms is that the matter has been firmly decided by God, and God will do it soon. So the repetition wasn't just a random accident or a weird coincidence. No, it was a rock-solid divine guarantee of both certainty and immediacy. This massive economic and agricultural shift is locked in, and it's starting right now.
Now, what is really fascinating about this next part, verses 33 through 36, is that Joseph doesn't just interpret the problem and then awkwardly stop. No, he immediately pivots to providing a highly organized, step-by-step administrative solution. He tells Pharaoh, okay, step 1, look for a discerning and wise man and put him in charge of the land. Step 2, appoint commissioners to oversee the whole process. Step 3, take a fifth, that is a 20% tax of the harvest of Egypt during the 7 years of abundance. And step 4, store all this massive amount of grain in the cities, keeping it safely under royal authority as a reserve. This is just brilliant, simple economic planning. By taxing or collecting exactly a fifth during times of record-breaking excess, the everyday people aren't going to starve, but the government will build a massive stockpile large enough to ensure the entire country isn't totally ruined when those 7 years of deadly famine finally hit.
Section 4. Joseph's rise to power. From prison to palace. So we see Pharaoh's immediate reaction to this plan in verse 37, and it truly marks one of the most incredible character arcs in the entire biblical text. Joseph's proposed plan seemed exceedingly good to Pharaoh and to all of his officials. Nobody argues. In verses 38 through 41, Pharaoh looks around at his entire royal court and asks them, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" Pharaoh openly, publicly recognizes the divine wisdom operating within Joseph. He then turns directly to Joseph and says, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you." And just like that, with a single sweeping declaration, Pharaoh unilaterally elevates this 30-year-old Hebrew man, a man who literally just hours ago was sitting forgotten in a dirty dungeon, to be the second in command over the entire land of Egypt.
So we see Pharaoh's immediate reaction to this plan in verse 37, and it truly marks one of the most incredible character arcs in the entire biblical text. Joseph's proposed plan seemed exceedingly good to Pharaoh and to all of his officials. Nobody argues. In verses 38 through 41, Pharaoh looks around at his entire royal court and asks them, "Can we find anyone like this man, one in whom is the Spirit of God?" Pharaoh openly, publicly recognizes the divine wisdom operating within Joseph. He then turns directly to Joseph and says, "Since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you." And just like that, with a single sweeping declaration, Pharaoh unilaterally elevates this 30-year-old Hebrew man, a man who literally just hours ago was sitting forgotten in a dirty dungeon, to be the second in command over the entire land of Egypt. Only the throne itself will be greater than Joseph.
To firmly solidify this massive transfer of power, verses 42 through 45 break down the specific, ancient symbols of authority that are bestowed upon Joseph. Pharaoh literally takes his own signet ring right off his finger and puts it on Joseph's finger. Now, this is huge. This gives Joseph the ultimate power to stamp official documents with the king's own authority. Pharaoh then dresses Joseph in robes of fine linen and places a heavy gold chain around his neck. These are the outward, highly visible markers of the highest royal status. Furthermore, he has Joseph ride in his second chariot, with men shouting, "Make way," or "Bow down before him," so everyone knows who's in charge. Pharaoh also gives Joseph an Egyptian wife, Asenath. This is absolutely key because it integrates him completely and seamlessly into the highest echelon of Egyptian society. The transition from prisoner to prime minister is now 100% complete.
So the crucial point now is what Joseph actually does with all this newly acquired power. Verses 46 through 49 show Joseph not wasting a single second. He immediately goes to work. We are told he is exactly 30 years old when he starts. He leaves Pharaoh's presence and travels throughout the entire land of Egypt. The 7 years of abundance begin exactly as predicted, and the land produces plentifully. Joseph diligently executes his own master plan without a hitch. He collects all the surplus food and stores it safely in the cities. The text really goes out of its way to emphasize the sheer, mind-boggling scale of his success. It says he stored up huge quantities of grain, quote, like the sand of the sea. It was so massive, so incomprehensibly huge, that he eventually just had to stop keeping records because it was simply beyond measure.
Before the dreaded family years began, we get this really brief, beautiful, personal interlude in verses 50 through 52. Joseph and his wife Asenath have 2 sons, and their names are deeply, deeply significant because they reflect Joseph's exact psychological and spiritual state at this point in his life. He names his firstborn son Manasseh, which sounds like the Hebrew word for forget. Joseph explains why, saying, "It is because God has made me forget all my trouble and all my father's household." Then he names his second son Ephraim, which means twice fruitful, and he says, "It is because God has made me fruitful in the land of my suffering." These simple yet profound Hebrew meanings show a man who has fully acknowledged his past pain, but who clearly sees God's active redeeming hand in bringing him peace and unprecedented success right there in a foreign land.
Section 5. The Great Famine begins. The 7 years end.
We transition now to verses 53 and 54, marking the end of the good times and the harsh, brutal onset of the global crisis. Just exactly as Joseph had said, the 7 years of abundance come to a complete end, and the 7 years of famine officially begin. The text makes a point to note that there was famine in all the other lands, but because of Joseph's massive preparation, in the whole land of Egypt, there was food. However, as the famine continues, it eventually starts to bite hard within Egypt too. The desperate people cry out to Pharaoh for bread. But look at Pharaoh's response in verse 55. It perfectly highlights his complete, unwavering trust in his appointed leader. He tells all the Egyptians, "Go to Joseph and do what he tells you." The king completely, 100% defers to Joseph's authority and his meticulously crafted master plan.
We finally conclude this step-by-step textual walkthrough of the chapter with verses 56 and 57. As the famine spreads out over the face of the whole country, becoming incredibly severe, Joseph opens all the storehouses and begins actively selling grain to the Egyptians. But here's the amazing part. It's not just Egypt that is saved. The final verse tells us that all the surrounding countries actually came to Egypt to buy grain from Joseph because the famine was severe in all the world. Joseph, through divine insight and his own careful administration, has literally become the savior of the known world, preserving countless lives.
Section 6. Key Lessons and Recap. Applying the text.
All right, we've just walked step by step through the straightforward, factual narrative, what is known as the pashhat, of Genesis chapter 41. Now, let's just take a moment to step back and extract some practical life lessons from this.
The text actually offers some simple yet incredibly profound ideas drawn directly from Joseph's behavior. First up is humility. Think about it. When standing before the most powerful man on earth, Joseph point-blank refused to take any credit for his own abilities. He explicitly attributed his gifts and the coming success directly to God. Second is preparation. The story highlights the massive importance of planning wisely during the good times. Joseph didn't just coast, he used the years of abundance to save and build solid reserves for the inevitable hard times that he knew would follow. And third is integrity. Joseph remained faithful, diligent, and completely ready to serve, even after sitting in a dark dungeon through years of totally unjust suffering and being entirely forgotten by others.
So as we wrap up our explainer of Genesis 41, I really want to leave you with this provocative thought to reflect on today. Look at how Joseph handled incredible adversity, but also how he handled sudden incredible success. How can you apply Joseph's total reliance on God, his deep humility, and his careful, structured planning to your own life today? Honestly, whether you find yourself right now in a season of waiting in the dark or you're in a season of great abundance, the simple truths of this chapter provide a remarkably powerful blueprint for how to move forward.
Thank you for learning with us. If this helped you understand the chapter better, like, subscribe, and join us for the next chapter.